Thanks very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Can you share with us, and this is something you've written, but your first reactions to Crossroads?
My first reactions. I think my first reaction to the school, to visiting Lindell, was I felt as if I was in the wrong place.
Okay.
And then part of it was that I was so used to referencing teachers as Mr. and Mrs. Ms. And I could not get used to calling you Arthur, and calling Carol, etc. That first name thing really threw me for a loop. And
I can't even remember whether Ms. had been invented yet then.
it definitely had been invented, but it just wasn't a part of my comfort zone.
Okay.
And there were just a number of things that was very unfamiliar, and I was coming from University City public schools. I don't remember U City schools having a particularly dedicated or strict guidebook, but it just seemed like it was so relaxed, and it was not something that I was necessarily familiar with, and or necessarily comfortable with, I should say that. And I also remember being introduced by a number of staff members as he's Logan, but he draws, which was a reference to, I think, Logan Martin. And so I was tall and lanky, but I drew. And so that was the way that I was being introduced to other people who were involved in cleaning up the building and preparing it for the fall semester. I didn't meet Logan until like a year later. He had already left the school. It was very strange to be referenced as Logan but draws, but that's how it began.
It makes me feel bad that there was such, gross stereotyping going on. Theoretically, we were beyond that, but we weren't.
No, I think it was a great way of breaking ice. I think it was wonderful, because otherwise I would have had to have not defined myself, but people would have had to have gotten to know me in a very short period of time. I think it was easier just to say Logan, but draws. I didn't take it as in offense. It was a little odd, all the same.
And how about the way school operated as opposed to the U City schools?
It was more like a family. It was by size, by the building itself, which had been a residence, so it had this family envelope, a familial envelope, and then one of the school vehicles, as I noted, was a Vista Cruiser, like the definitive station wagon, a family station wagon from the 1960s. So it worked as a family, is how I see it now, looking back on it. We always saw you as the principal. We always saw you as the final word, and I think we showed respect to the teachers. In fact, perhaps we showed more respect to the teachers at Crossroads than we did to our former schools, or the teachers of our former schools, because we had so much respect for the staff and for what was being afforded to us.
And there were some remarkable people, not the least of whom was Carol. And if you have some recollections on her, those are particularly special. And I might add that, to my knowledge, you are the only person from the Crossroads family who went to her service in Lancaster, PA, of which I'm most thankful.
Oh, I barely made it through. In fact, I probably embarrassed everyone more than I helped the situation. But I think I remember, Carol, I write about it, the first time meeting the two of you at your house in Laclede Town. And and I remember Carol asking me questions, not my mother, who had really brought me, had done the research. I had no idea where I was going that day.
Mhm.
And Carol just asked me questions, not my mother. And until my mother asked that question that I write about, which is, are you and Arthur planning on having a family? And it still sticks with me, um, because I thought it was such a personal question, and I never thought of my mother as being offensive or out of line. I thought of her as having great great talent at being most diplomatic. And yet she asked this very forward question. And then Carol gave the response, which was no, that we see that our family is Crossroads. The kids of Crossroads are our children, which I'm paraphrasing,
Yeah.
but and that meant so much and still does to this day. But I thought that was such a it was an answer I wasn't expecting. On top of the question I wasn't expecting my mother to ask, but it I think it helps to understand what Crossroads was in those very early years, which um, it was more of a family environment. And you and I have had this discussion before. It's the climate and Crossroads today, as you would expect, is so much different than the Crossroads that you started in 1974.
Mhm.
And I think that part of what we forget is that the climate of the lingering Great Society and the divorce rate and the latchkey phenomena of kids going home without parental supervision and really being on the streets more or less. Um, there was a missing um, uh, there was a missing facet to life for a lot of the kids that I knew in U City schools, and you basically took over. You filled that gap. You and Carol filled that gap. You became parents. You became siblings, psychiatrists. Um, you know, you were our entertainment, and I look back and think, oh my God, these people, what were they thinking? And that you gave Saturday evenings to go see a movie, or taking us to a play, or doing so many things. It was your time to unwind, and yet you involved us. And I really think you saved a lot of kids. I mean, there were some kids that we could talk about that did not make it, that did not have a continuation of that Crossroads warmth and nurturing and parenting by transplant or substitution. And they didn't make it after the Crossroads experience, and that's sad.
I think on balance, and particularly in those years, we were doing a lot of things that worked really well. And you and those with whom you were close, I
Mhm.
think were a particular group that just worked so well. And there was a lot of playful banter between you and one another, between you and
Yeah.
Carol and me, between you and other teachers. There's someone, and I can't remember offhand, who talked about a little banter that he gave to Kim. And you wouldn't think that she would be into that, but she was a little bit. And maybe you can reflect on her a little bit if you don't mind.
But on Chem,
Yep.
um, amazingly, um, Karen Techner used to talk about being the goddess of propriety for Crossroads, and in many respects she was. But I actually think Chem also shared that role.
Mhm.
Chem was and is um, so so sensitive to the people she is with at the moment,
Mhm.
and she was a great listener. And I don't remember her ever scowling or ever telling us, no, that's not what I'm looking for, or losing temper. She was very accommodating with regards to our interpretations of what we were reading. And if we were off the track of where she wanted us to go, she was just so good and so calm in how she directed us back to the task at hand. And I haven't had a teacher like that. I think she is exceptional in how she engages kids of different ages in conversation, and then makes them feel comfortable. Your opinion matters. Your thoughts are important. I don't remember the student that you're referencing with regards to Kim, but she always came.
It wasn't Fawn who had written something funny about Kim and Faulkner.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I'll try to remember. So, you know, my first response when I met you was,
Mhm.
you know, I was just thrilled because I had been teaching for 5 years, and I had never met any student who felt any affinity for the Kennedys, particularly JFK. And it was like, you know, this wonderful person, flawed indeed, but wonderful person who just seemed to be evaporating from the memories of so many people, maybe never having been there with younger people. And
Mhm.
can you tell us a little bit about how your initial interest in the Kennedys developed and what has sustained it through all these years?
Um, I, I was born the day after JFK was assassinated, and you actually led a conversation in one of the classrooms at Lyndall. It was on this date, and I think you acknowledged it was my birthday. And there were other teachers in the room and other students, and you just talked about how you felt that day and how it changed your life. And then other teachers voiced in. And I thought, oh, this is so great because I don't really hear it. I heard my mother's perspective about being in labor during all of that time. And my brother, my eldest brother, wanting to take her to the hospital in his Triumph TR3. And she said, if I get in there, I'm having the baby there. And so they had to get all of the family lore. But it was wonderful to hear about lives that have been changed by someone who was my hero.
Mhm.
And he became my hero and still remains my hero because I didn't have Dr. Seuss books. And I didn't have, you would think at the youngest of 8, you would think there'd be a stock room of children's books, but there really wasn't.
Hmm.
And so when I came along, I had The Making of the President, which was a thick book, but I can remember going through and reading excerpts of it when I was like 4 or 5 years old.
This
And
is Richard
then the
Schlesinger
picture,
Jr.'s book.
and then the picture
Or no,
books as
Theodore
well.
White, right? Theodore White.
Um, the making, and then
Yep.
also the death of the president by Manchester, which
Yeah.
was
Yep.
again no pictures, but I can remember reading excerpts of it. And then you had the picture books that were also a part of it. But so that was the incentive, and I think that when I was born in California, and our our parents were given it. My father was with Western Electric, and our parents were given an opportunity to move to about 3 or 4 locations. They were on a cycle, and our mother was concerned that we had no interaction with not with people of other colors, other cultures. We had we were in a very white area outside of San Francisco, and she was concerned with all that was transpiring in the United States that we were not experiencing that. And so we moved. They chose St. Louis, where they had married, and they moved us back. And I think that that also helped in aligning with the Kennedy lore, et cetera, because in St. Louis there were so many aspects of education and in looking at Laclede the developments that really tied into the idealism of JFK, I thought, as a kid. I mean, I still mourn the original Bush Stadium because to me that was just the perfect homage to ancient Rome, and at the same time to JFK's rebuilding of America in a post-World War II, as a historically sensitive time. But so it remains of interest. I got a lot of teasing at Crossroads that I would marry Jackie O, or I would become her valet or her housekeeper. But I will say that the Crossroads experience encouraged me to do a number of things. And one was to keep pestering Mrs. Onassis. I knew I was going to write a book on my topic, which was the Kennedy White House. I knew all along I was going to do that. And I pestered her, and with that, doors opened. And it became my career. So that my undergraduate thesis at Vassar, my graduate thesis at FIT, both of them had to do with the White House and the White House restoration by the Kennedys. And by chance, I had my graduate thesis in hand, and it had received good review. And I thought, well, I'm going to try to publish this. So I sent it to not Jackie O, who was already dead, but I sent it to Caroline.
Mm-hmm.
And I also sent it to Mrs. Charles Wrightsman, who had been Mrs. Kennedy's great friend and had funded a great portion of the restoration. And Caroline Kennedy gave me permission to publish it. And Jane Wrightsman miraculously sent me a check to publish it and do an exhibition.
Wow.
I hadn't even asked. So, take a chance, take a risk. To that, I can still remember one thing that Carol did, or both of you did, which is when I came back from college into St. Louis, and I had sent a resume to Nancy Reagan. And by chance, she invited me to the White House to meet with the curatorial staff. And I had said, well, I'll do it later in the summer. And Carol said, no, when something like that happens, you take advantage of it. And so she said, I will pay for your airfare. And I think she did give me money for my airfare. And I flew out to Washington, D.C., and I had that interview at the White House, which also opened up some doors, closed a few doors, but opened up some doors. So it's taking a risk. And I think all of that, comes from Crossroads. We were encouraged to dream and to reach and to, really go for it. And I think I did. And I think whatever successes I have had are largely due to you and Carol and Karen Techner and Louise Cameron and just the entire Crossroads experience.
I'm really taken by what you said about Laclede Town and the New Frontier or Great Society, because I know both Carol and I always thought that it was somewhat like Southwest DC, and Southwest DC was something, which we had thought would not have happened had there not been a reawakening of the needs of people in the cities. And in many ways, I thought Laclede Town was like Southwest DC, only without the air conditioning. And that was a part of why I think Laclede Town failed in the long run, also in part because of terrible mismanagement. But it was a wonderful place to build an integrated neighborhood and for us to have a school, which reminds me, I am working hard at trying to find anyone who might have a photo of Peacock Alley, where we were the first 2 years. So that was before you, but if you know
Right.
of anyone, that would be awesome.
Yeah, let me think on that.
So about your connection with the Kennedys, and that immediately tied in then with art and architecture. Am I correct about that?
Well, it did, and I have to. There's a blessing in being the youngest of a large litter, and that by the time you come along, your parents are tired and exhausted, and they're more patient. And I think when you're the youngest, you also absorb some of their lost ambitions. So our mother had wanted to be an artist and a singer, et cetera. And I don't sing, but the artist component certainly affected me. And my father was an engineer who wanted to be, I think, an architect among many things. He certainly didn't want to be a father, but he wanted to be an architect. And so I think I absorbed those things. And then when Crossroads comes along, it's like, well, you can do these things. I mean, I would sit there and I would draw rooms. And I remember upstairs on the second floor of Lindell, I draw rooms. I do room portraits, which there is such such a focus in art, although it seems odd. And I remember one of maybe it was Heather Stoltz or someone else sitting next to me said, you know, this is like the third room you've drawn and there are no people. Why are you doing that? And I said, because I find the architecture, I find the objects to be the greatest interest. And that reminds me of some time with you and Carol. And I think we were sitting as a group. There were maybe about 6 students, and someone had asked, well, what do you think I'm going to be? Sort of the que sera, sera moment. And each of us had a chance to say what we'd like to be. And I said I wanted to be a politician. And Carol dismissed that and said, absolutely not. You are not going to be a politician. You are going to be a museum curator. And she was right on the money.
Nailed it. Yep.
She nailed it. But I think that's a wonderful tribute to Carol and to you, because you really did listen to us. You heard things that perhaps we weren't hearing in what we were saying. But I think you could have predicted probably the careers of the majority of the students that came through Crossroads.
I think we would have come close. I agree with you. And I want to go up about 300 miles up to Chicago. We took trips up there, and part of the focus was on architecture. Are there any people who particularly influenced you in terms of becoming more interested in architecture and those which are especially unique to Chicago?
I think Crossroads opened my eyes to Frank Lloyd Wright, and by chance, and again taking risks, I became friends with Edgar Kaufman Jr., who was the son of Edgar Kaufman of Kaufman Department Stores in Pittsburgh. But Edgar Kaufman Jr. is the one who studied with Frank Lloyd Wright, and then when his father wanted to build a country house, Falling Water, Edgar Jr. said, well, you need to build, you need to use Mr. Wright. So I became friends with him, and I think in part because of the seeds that had been planted in those trips to Chicago.
And I was wondering, and perhaps mistakenly, whether Bobby Duffy came on any of those trips, because he had a wealth of knowledge and was a very good explainer.
Boy, Bobby Duffy, the best memory I have of him, and the man deserves a gold medal and so many levels. But when we were sleeping on the top of
Mansion House,
and it was cold, and so we all gathered in one of the, I guess, the elevator corridors on the top, on the roof, and it was just sort of an opening up, a sharing. And most of us were just saying we hate our teen years, and I'm sure at this gathering, one of us said, I asked you, or asked Bobby Duffy, or asked Carol, if you had the chance, would you choose to go back to your teen? And inevitably, I'm sure the answer was no. And I can remember Bobby Duffy then opening up about being shorter than he wished he was. And I thought, wow, I felt, first off, I was like, this is a lot of information. Maybe we need to think about this. But he just talked about height and about how it had affected his, I guess, growing up and maturing. And it was just such a beautiful monologue. And it wasn't monologue. It was just a beautiful response. And it was maybe 4 sentences. But it really put adulthood in perspective, and thinking about this man who I always thought had everything, was talking about where he fell short, so to speak. And it was just the most beautiful experience, and it's a conversation I refer to often, because I just thought he opened up. He really made himself vulnerable, and at Crossroads, that was one of the great things, that there was a vulnerability. Um, we could always tell if Eddie Potter was having a bad day. We
Yeah,
could,
right.
um, and for Carol, for that matter. I mean, when Carol was not the most organized or the neatest person, but God help anyone when she got into her cleaning mood, because then that affected everyone. Um,
And
but I'm
yeah,
sorry,
point
go
of
on.
information, that you did some remarkable cleaning where Carol and I lived, in the St. Regis, 3,000 square feet. And, you were never disappointed in terms of how much mess there would be, always more than the previous week, it seemed.
No,
But
it wasn't, and I know I screwed up a load of laundry with Carol's red bathrobe or something, and you had pink underwear for a couple of weeks, and I apologize for that. But that's
not a
but
problem.
but to that, you bring up the cleaning, and I think about when we did these trips. Almost everyone had to raise the money for the trips. They didn't have it in an account, and that was also a great experience about how are you going to raise the money to go to Chicago or to New York or to Washington, and that really put us to the test. Um, and I know Ernie did the butterflies in
Yeah.
the plexi boxes, and other people got into raking leaves or doing, which is what I was doing. I think the first trip to Chicago I was raking leaves in my neighborhood, or doing raking gardens. There really was a lot of motivation and inspiration to get going, and not to sit in front of a TV per se. Or I don't know where we would have been though if we had had iPhones, and if we had had. I'm not sure if you would have succeeded as well as you succeeded had the technology been ahead of you.
That is a good point. But I want to bring up one other thing about money and trips. We
Hmm.
were in DC, we were
Hmm.
taking the metro, and I had a money pouch on my side, and
Hmm.
there was $2,000 in cash in it. And this would have been late 70s, early 80s. But when $2,000 then, I'm speculating, would be worth six or $8,000 now. And not everybody on the metro had the best of intents, and somebody lifted that from me.
Hmm.
Very embarrassing, but more than being embarrassing, you know, where were we going to go then? What were we going to do for this trip? Because um, I think in that pouch also were the traveler's checks, something of the past, which would be a way of trying to supplement yourself if you lost cash. And maybe you can remember exactly how you intervened to save the day.
I don't know if saved the day, but I remember saying, "Arthur, watch your belt. Arthur, watch your belt," because we didn't. Our mother didn't drive, and so all of our commuting in St. Louis was by bus.
Hmm.
And we had our mother had taught us about the pickpockets and about how things were done, and she would also confront them. She'd stand up, and so when I saw what I thought was happening, I said, "Arthur, watch your belt." And I think Mike Bailey was with us. Is
Hmm.
that right?
Yeah, I
Is that
think so.
possible? Um, and he didn't quite understand what was going on either. And I don't remember I know. I spoke to the police. The police came, and they were most cooperative. And I don't know how you managed to pull the trip off after that. My memory isn't that good but I do remember saying, "Watch your belt, Arthur. Watch your belt," as we were getting on, and obviously one was in front of you, one was in back of you, one dropped something and was stopping you from getting on, and then the other one took the belt. But that's.
Yeah, yeah, but you know, you were of tremendous help with the police, and we were able to work out with a bank, what would have been the traveler's checks, and and I don't think we lost a single dollar from it, but eternally grateful to you. You know, when you were
Yeah.
talking about public transportation, I feel that the federal government spent $50 million for you in putting in the trolley loop, which would have gone almost exactly from your home to Crossroads
Yeah.
on Oliver.
Yeah.
And it has not been a good investment. As you look at Crossroads now and the experiences you had there, um, what do you think was um, really needs to be preserved, and what is it okay for the school to divest itself of?
Well, it's a different time. It's a different era. It's
Hmm.
the I talk about the latchkey, the high divorce rate. Um, I'm not sure that the majority of the senior class would be counted as being from divorced families, but I think it was probably my situation. Although it's a small class, maybe that doesn't count, but certainly on Lindell, the divorce was the majority.
Right.
Um, I think what we probably recognized was lost in the move from Lindell to Bolivar was the school suddenly was forced to um, take on the professionalism, the sense of professionalism that it had perhaps been tucking away on Lindell to maintain that familial, that family-like environment that was so right for the size of the school and for the time. Um, I, th- there was a definite shift, not just the geographic, but the Crossroads became professional. It had to, and so I'm not sure if what I miss, what I felt was so much a part of what it would be, who I am is due to Lindell. Who I am is less of de Bolivar.
And
Um,
I just wonder if we had taken a different path, if we had not said we're going to get accredited, because we didn't have to. And um, if we had not expanded the board to include non-staff, could we have survived? I don't know, but I think you don't think so. Go ahead.
No, I don't. I think it's sort of that Theodore Roosevelt moment or America 1900, 1901 moment where you have to step up to the plate and you have to put your big boy pants on. You can't remain the child forever or the teen forever. And to that, had you held back with the board, making it more of an insulated, just faculty, um, I don't think the school would exist to this day. I don't think it would have survived much longer after my graduation. It had to
Yeah,
grow up. It
yeah.
had to evolve. And to that, Arthur, it's the you and Carol came to visit me in the Hudson Valley, and you were traveling, etc. And I, I think at that point I realized that what I saw as great fun for all was not great fun for all. That teaching the way you taught, investing in the students the way you did, took its toll, and you could never have done that for um, too many years beyond 1982 or it just you didn't have it in you, and it was eating at you, and I saw that, and this is probably in the 1990s, I guess. Yes, early
I,
1990s.
I I think you're absolutely right. I think that psychologically it was very wearing on us. it was wearing on others in the school.
Mhm.
There was a more than a little bit of dysfunction. And, you know, I think that perhaps now when having psychologists in school is more of a norm and something that, you know, people are willing to work with, that may well have helped us or bought us some time. But it's a shame. And you know, there's part of me that thinks you have an institution like Crossroads and you let it go X number of years and then boom, you like end it and start over because those early years are so exciting and so much more genuine, I think. Could be wrong, but it's just a thought.
Well, um, you raised your children.
Yep,
That was it.
we did. Yep.
And the school as it exists now, I mean, I'm really proud to say I'm from Crossroads, and I'm really proud of um, of the lessons that are still a part of Crossroads. What I see is, um, you know, there is still an energy. There's still a sense of community. There's, I think, a great encouragement to put history in modern context, to always use
Mhm.
history, not just to see it on a shelf. Um, but I don't think um, nothing was wrong about what has happened. You can't look at the past and say, "Oh, well, if we had done this, if we hadn't have tailored the board or opened up the board." I disagree because I think all of those changes had to happen, and it was healthy. Um, there were some rough times, I'm sure, for you and for everyone else involved, but it was important for them to allow you to move on, and all that you've done since. I mean, you're still invested in Crossroads, but then you've expanded and I mean, I don't know how I would never consider um, a decision to keep Crossroads at up to ninth grade or eighth grade, ninth grade. You made the right decision in having it go to 12th grade and having a graduating class and sending students off into the world, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, foreign exchange students. What, three foreign exchange students in what the first senior class of like eight? I mean, that was pretty amazing.
You know,
And
Tim, one of the things I love about talking with you is the historian in you and being able to look at things, you know, not just in 1 or 2 years and not just 15 or 50, but, you know, over a very long period of time. And that, you know, we go through stages and it really helps if we're aware of that. And I
mhm,
think you bring a lot of that awareness to us. So I'm going to wrap it up now, if that's all
mhm.
right with you,
Sure.
or is there anything you'd like to say that, uh,
No, it's been fun. It's been fun.